Ferrari helps Pirelli with the preparations for the 2026 Formula One Championship. 1 week ahead of the Austrian Grand Prix weekend at the Red Bull Ring, Ferrari took to the Fiorano track for a 2-day Pirelli test focused on preparations for the 2026 season. As the summer sun warmed the track surface of the iconic Fiorano circuit on Friday, Charles Leclerc completed the final day of testing dedicated to the development of wet-weather tires for next year. The Monegasque driver did so with the SF25, modified to accommodate the new, narrower tires. The aerodynamic setup was also adjusted to approximate future configurations. The goal was to gather data on wet-weather tires that will be used next year, when the new technical regulations will come into effect. For this reason, the irrigable track at Fiorano proved to be essential, especially on 2 days marked by scorching heat. Zhou Guanyu and Charles Leclerc took turns behind the wheel of the Ferrari. The Chinese driver, who is serving as Ferrari's reserve this year, drove a modified SF25 adapted to fit the 2026 tire dimensions. The former Sauber driver completed 159 laps, making his debut in a Ferrari and recording a best time of 59.820 in dry conditions and 1.07.400 on intermediate tires. The Chinese driver, together with engineers from Bikoka, worked on comparing various prototypes of intermediate and full wet tires, making use of the irrigation system installed at Ferrari's private track. As for Charles Leclerc, the Monegasque completed 110 laps, setting a best time of 59.210 achieved on slick tires during the vehicle validation run in the morning, before the track was artificially wetted, and 1.06.180 on intermediates. Altogether, the two Ferrari drivers completed nearly 270 laps over the course of these test sessions with Pirelli, while Lewis Hamilton, who is not particularly fond of testing sessions, opted out. Within this context, lap times were also discussed, both before the track was artificially flooded and after, when water was indeed present on the track owned by the prancing horse. These track conditions aim to simulate a scenario and validate certain tire behaviors with cars that, despite all efforts, are not the 2026 Formula One models. It was a positive outcome, but with some key reservations. Mario Isola, director of Pirelli Motorsport, offered a first assessment at the end of the session. The Italian manager seemed moderately optimistic. In addition to thanking the historic Italian team for both the use of the track and its willingness to participate, the head of the Italian tire manufacturer showed a certain awareness in his technical report on the day. Reproducing certain scenarios with the proper level of consistency is always rather complicated when it comes to wet tracks. Moreover, temperatures that are far from those of actual race conditions greatly affect the tests being carried out. This is an admission that won't surprise anyone familiar with the technical dynamics of modern Formula One and the myriad associated challenges. The cars used in this type of testing, though suitably modified, are not truly capable of reproducing the aerodynamic load and behavior of the single-seaters we will see in the 2026 Formula One campaign. And this opens up a couple of legitimate questions. How predictive are these tests, really? And why hasn't the FIA built some prototype cars based on the 2026 regulations? It would have made everything easier. The 2026 rules, with their push toward energy efficiency and aerodynamic agility, will shape a profoundly different Formula One. In this scenario, current tests can certainly provide a starting point, but as mentioned, they remain inevitably far from the final picture. It is a technical paradox that Pirelli knows all too well, as they have always had to operate this way. They are tasked with developing an essential component, namely the tires, without being able to test them on the cars for which they are actually designed, a peculiarity that could be addressed more effectively, especially if the International Federation offered more support. And yet, from this difficulty arises a fascinating engineering challenge for Pirelli, which deserves credit for the work it has done in recent years. The Formula One tire supplier makes a virtue out of necessity, as the saying goes, a point confirmed by Mario Isola himself. This is the great compromise of those who, in the top tier of motorsport, are forced to anticipate the future without having yet seen it. A truly extreme situation, but one that this Italian excellence has always managed with great success. From a performance standpoint, lap times are certainly not the key metric. The goal of these sessions was to understand the operational window of the tires and ensure more consistent behavior in changing conditions. Pirelli aims to provide teams with a product that, in 2026, will be more predictable, versatile, and, if possible, less susceptible to the whims of a damp track. After all, this has been seen repeatedly. Full wet tires are rarely used and are often quickly abandoned in favor of intermediates, a problem of efficiency and adaptability that has long remained unresolved. To be frank, Isola's statement reflects complete transparency. Yet it also reveals a truth that Formula One often tends to underestimate. This refers to the structural difficulty of simulating realistic wet conditions, which makes every development effort little more than a gamble. Pirelli is doing its utmost with the tools available, but the absence of tests with real 2026 cars remains a technical gap that will only be closed over time. This is not the fault of the Milan-based supplier, but rather a consequence of a system increasingly constrained by strict regulations and economic limitations. Fortunately, the development path does not stop. The week after the British Grand Prix, slick tires will be tested at the beautiful and iconic Silverstone circuit, a classic but very demanding proving ground, where high speeds and medium to high load corners can provide more precise insights into the performance of the new tires in dry conditions. For Pirelli, it will be an opportunity to compare the data gathered at Fiorano in order to determine the best path forward for the future. But even there, the results will have to be interpreted with caution. The real assessment will only come when the new single-seaters hit the track for the pre-season testing session ahead of the 2026 Formula One Championship. And who knows whether, in the meantime, the technical dialogue between teams, the FIA and Pirelli will become more direct, more dynamic, and less constrained by practices that now seem outdated. That would be an important step forward to make life easier for everyone. 2026 is still nearly 6 months away, but for Formula One teams, it is already just around the corner, closer than it may seem. Behind the scenes, major manufacturers have been working for years on developing the future power units that will debut next year, and one of the most significant changes will concern the balance between the thermal and electric components. Starting in 2026, half of the total energy produced by the power unit, also due to a new way of interpreting data from the energy flow meter, will come from the electric component, effectively matching the thermal part. This prospect has raised considerable concern among manufacturers, to the point that several solutions to manage and limit energy use have already been introduced in the latest draft of the regulations. Despite this, there remains a certain apprehension about the future, especially in the event that some teams fall behind their rivals. For this reason, various measures are being considered to allow the slower manufacturers to close the gap and catch up with those already in a position of advantage in the new technical cycle. One of the central topics will be the management of the electric component. As mentioned earlier this year, optimizing the cars starting in 2026 could prove even more complex than in the past. It won't just be a matter of redefining the aerodynamic shapes of the single-seaters, but also of tackling energy management in a more sophisticated way throughout the entire lap. The increased importance of the electric component will in fact make it more complicated to determine how and when to use hybrid power during the lap. Fearing that the energy might not be sufficient, the FIA has imposed limits on electric support, which, beyond a certain speed, must gradually decrease until it is completely shut off.